It's time to take your business to the next level, the boss level. These are the premier business owner strategies and successes being utilized by the industry's top talent today. Rock your business like a boss, a VO boss. Now let's welcome your host, Ann Ganguza.
Hey everyone, welcome to the VO Boss Podcast. I'm your host, Ann Ganguza, along with my very special guest co-host, coming from New Zealand, Miss Jennie Stenhouse. Hey Jennie, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. You're coming to me from the future. I think that was so cute. That's the way you you talked to me the other day. I'm like, well, it's Saturday, but no, it's Sunday over there by you. So it's the future coming to us from the future.
Yeah, I wish I could use it for my advantage more.
Right?
Lotto numbers would be good, or winning sports teams. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work like that.
Well, in one of our last podcast episodes, we had a discussion about how our voices can be used in the voice industry. And there's so many different ways. And I think at one point you said, well, I want our voices to be used for the good, for the good of the industry, for the good of people. And we don't really want to think about, our voices potentially being used in any sort of negative, bad way or not valued way. And I thought it would be good to talk about safety and ethics and inclusivity in the voice industry. There's a lot to talk about. How can
there really is.
Yeah. How can we ensure that our voices are being used for good?
Yeah, it's definitely a complex a topic to talk about, but I think it's really important to discuss it, because one of the knee-jerk reaction is to maybe just talk about the good things, the accessibility, the ability for use in translations, and the ease that voice can be used to make those everyday tasks more enjoyable, and how in healthcare and all these really wonderful applications that are really beneficial for everyone. And so it's really this idea, we'll just shine a light on all these really good use cases and talk about them. But if we ignore all the ways that it could be used in a negative way, it means we'd be really unprepared for when it could happen. And also
when it does, if it happens.
And it's hard to think, if you think about any technology, literally anything, there is positive ways to use it, but there are also negative ways to use it. And if we don't prepare ourselves for them or discuss how it could be used, then those use cases, we won't recognize it when it happens, or we won't put in safeguards to make it not happen. So one thing that I'm particularly interested in about this is there is this really fine line between personalization and privacy. So to have something be really Facebook is probably quite an easy example that people understand. To have something very personalized like your Facebook, you are putting in so much private data. However, it does make it for a better experience. If a voice assistant or an AI assistant knows a lot about you, it means that it knows in the morning that you're going to wake up at 6:30 and the first thing you want is your coffee. It can greet you in such a manner, or it can be smart wired to your coffee machine that it knows to turn on the coffee machine for you without you explicitly telling it. So
if I can just say, I know that there's a number of people who I've spoken with recently that say that they've either spoken to, someone in their household about an item, and the next thing they know, it's on Facebook. And so where is that coming from? How is that happening? I mean, I have an idea, but I think you mentioned at one point Facebook is a little bit closed right now in terms of the development of a voice in that application. But what do you say to that? I mean, is that an ethical, are they capturing our voice? What's happening? Do we know?
So we don't know. I would say there's no clear answer, but categorically Facebook says that it does not access your microphone in any way, shape or form. But I always find it interesting when people are like, oh, I would never put Amazon Alexa in my house. And it's like, well,
home.
You carry around a microphone in your pocket all day long.
True. Isn't that true?
And the other thing is you're giving up so much data. It was really interesting. There's a couple of applications, I can't think of the names, but I will source them for you, where you can download and see what applications are accessing which data from your phone.
Right.
So like even if your friend says something like, say they wanted to go to a specific coffee shop, and that's what you think it's recognized, it might just be the fact that that is a popular coffee shop on their route home from work, or they pass by it, or it's in their domain, and that particular
Right, it's
coffee shop
geolocation.
so geolocation and like practically everything that you do. So your phone is basically a computer with a huge bunch of sensors on it. I'm diving in for with Neosensory in developing apps on Android, and I was shocked to see how many sensors there are actually on my phone, and I have a mid-level phone. So there's about 18.
You do? I'm surprised.
Yeah.
Or why wouldn't you have multiple phones?
Well,
do you know what I mean? One with every iOS, with every operating system on it.
One for each. Yeah, I wish. Maybe when I make it big, when I'm famous, I'll get every phone possible. I've got small children, and they're very expensive small children. Yeah, so there's like this huge wealth of data that you're generating. And the amazing thing about machine learning and AI is that you can sort of chuck data at it. And as long as it's nicely labeled, it can sort of find the patterns about how this stuff works together without us being aware of it. And that's probably that's sort of known as the black box of AI, because not always can you as a developer know how it's finding out patterns. So it's basically chomping through all this data and finding out patterns, and those patterns might align to what advertisements the algorithm thinks will work best for you. So that's probably more likely that they've chucked through a whole lot of sensor data or maybe your website data, and it just happens to be, and that means if you're like, oh, they must have listened to me, that means that algorithm has done a really good job, because that means it is aligned with what you wanted. So that's probably where like the creepiness is.
and I'll tell you, I advertised on Facebook, and I understand that there's tracking, what people like, we track who comes on our website. And so, that information is available and has been for years on Facebook. When you do advertising, there's a lot of data that is collected. And I never thought it was microphone based. I thought it was just, tracking your web movements. And that was how, or your, what places that you visited, groups that you're in, comments, likes, those sorts of things. And that generated an amazing amount of data that allowed advertisers to really find out quite a bit about potential clients. And so that I know has always been the case. And I just think that now it's like, well, I didn't visit the website. I just know I talked to somebody in my house about it. And then all of a sudden it appeared. So I think that's like lately I've been hearing people say, is it possible that it's accessing your microphone? But you bring up such a great point about we carry around our phones, which has, so many things going on every day in our pocket, and it never leaves our side. So that is probably the one device that can pick up the majority of data on us.
Yeah, I think. And the other thing is, if you link that data with like a wealth of other data, like say what advertisements have come on your TV and things like that. And so the phone sensor can tell when you pick up the phone. So like if you were watching an ad and you were like, oh, maybe I'd look that up, and you picked it up but didn't actually finish looking it up, there'd still be that data that you picked up your phone during that advertisement. So there's like so many correlations that could happen that are easier to make than imagine the scandal of Facebook accessing all your phones. I mean, recently, Instagram was done because they accidentally put out a build where they had access to the user's front-facing camera, so they could watch people scroll. And so, yeah, it's such a violation. Oh, wow. Really, really bad.
Yeah, that's a total violation. See, that's bad ethics, right? Yeah. We're talking about ethics right now. Yeah, that was bad.
It's so bad. And so they rolled it back and apologized really quickly and said that it was a fault. But can you imagine how interesting that information would be to advertisers? Because they'd be able to go, oh, look, that user's irises expanded. And I was just reading this morning, in fact, about how you can monitor heart rate via a webcam image. So you would be able to watch this person scroll if you had this data stream and be like, oh, look, that person's heart rate went up when they went past this ad. Or and eye dilation is usually if you're interested or aroused or excited by an image, you could tell so much, and adding all the semantic information or semantic data to this kind of stream has huge value to advertisers. So you can see why Instagram is sort of like finding out ways to find more data. It's always a benefit to advertisers. The more targeted you can make advertising, the better it is.
But the thing of it is like, what do you do? I mean, do you just hide in a bubble? How do you handle that? I mean, are you afraid that everybody in the world is going to get it? I've always been, I don't know. I've always been more of the person that says, well, I'm not really hiding anything. I mean, I'm a business. I've advertised before. I mean, that was how I used to respond to the advertising on any social media platform. I mean, look, there's data that's collected, and I am a business, and I use this data to advertise. So how can I be hypocritical, when all of a sudden, however, I think, when it draws when it goes over the edge of what I think is acceptable, we have to be aware that it can happen. But then what can we do to make sure that it doesn't happen, or I guess retaliate if it does? Like what do you, is there suggestions? I mean, do we have, things in place?
Read the terms and conditions is my suggestion. And the terms and conditions do cover this kind of stuff, like when you sign up for Facebook. But the interesting thing about most of them are that they have the right to change their terms and conditions without really notifying you. So there are independent organizations like the EFF, the Electronic
Frontier Foundation.
Who, they are really doing as much as humanly possible to advocate for privacy and the protection of data for individuals across the world. And there's also legal things by countries like GDPR
exactly.
and the CPAA.
I had a podcast
and Brazil have their own version as well.
Had a podcast about that recently, and actually just updated the terms of service on my own websites, because I had somebody that had noticed that my terms were not up to date, and I was like, oops, got to make sure that's correct and make sure I tell people how their data is being used. And that is something important, bosses, by the way. If you have a website out there, it is important that you have an updated terms of service on your website. I mean, it's the right thing to do, to let people know if you're keeping their data, if you're collecting email addresses or whatever you might be doing when they're on your website, you need to notify them and let them know how their data is, or how their data is being used.
Going through all of those things, like I also run the website for Women in Voice along with Romina, who's amazing. But that was one of our most complex pieces of work, was making sure that we were doing GDPR compliancy with CPA and always treating people's data with respect in a documented way. And because everyone's data is so valuable, there's a big push for this idea of data sovereignty. Yeah, it should be.
Yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, absolutely should be. That's how we can combat this. How is our data being used? Is it ethical? Is it not? And that includes our voices.
And I think there's definitely, and like your voice of value, and I think there will be a growth in the ability to track your data better, and that will include your voice, like we mentioned before, like finding out where your voice is actually used, especially when it's sort of like the ambient computing becomes more mainstream and perhaps is integrated into public spaces, because that's a whole other kettle of fish. Like what are your data rights if you're in a public space? And that I think is highlighted by like the social media world, where people film people doing anything and everything, and it's like, well, it's not actually people's right to do that. But so I think there will be much interesting stuff to come, and I think there will be industries and products to come out of it for personal data protection.
I think I know, my husband works for an AI company, and I do know for a fact that they are either in the process of developing or working with a company that is able to track, because they also work in radio and they do ads. So to track where the ad is being played, and so if you have software that can track where that ad might be being played, and that includes digital media, not just TV or radio, but digital media, which is the biggest thing. Like, how do you know when your voice has been used for YouTube pre-roll? How many impressions has it made? How long has somebody listened to it? There is software that is coming out that will be able to do that, and I think that's gonna really help us. And I'll tell you what, that technology can't come quick enough for us, in a voiceover industry. And I think, well, for any of us really in voice, because I think that's going to help keep if there's potential bad, in terms of abuse of using voice places that maybe it shouldn't be, or places that are in occasions where you wouldn't be aware of it being used or not wanting it to be used. I think it's a critical piece of technology to be developed.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that the other thing that would help against is so there's a couple of projects that are developing synthetic voices of users, of people's loved ones, to have this repository of information or interaction with them after they pass. And I think it's both really interesting, but also makes the hair at the back of my neck stand up, because imagine if you were being sold something by the voice of your father. How much more convincing would it be if your dad was like, you should buy that McDonald's Happy Meal?
Oh my goodness. I wasn't even thinking of that. And what's funny is that I literally, and I talked about this with somebody else, I literally have a voice message from my mother who passed in 2014. And it says, "Hi, I love you." And it's the most precious thing for me. I've made a trillion backups of it. But I have it on my phone. I've made a backup of it everywhere. And I backed that backup up. And then I back that one up too. But I have it in multiple places. But in times when I miss her, I will play that. But I will still say that it's a little kind of freaky. But I do love to hear her voice, but only that one that is personal to me, and I have it nowhere else except in my special place. And I don't know how I would react to my mother having more than that. You know what I mean? Where she's saying, "I love you." I don't know if she were trying to sell me something. That wouldn't be right. So in regards to ethics, I think it's super important that we have companies, I guess when they're formed, if they're going to be utilizing voice, that they have some sort of ethics policy on the utilization of the voice. I think that's so important. I know that my husband's company, AI company, has an ethics policy. I think that if any companies are to be working in this area, it would behoove them, because I don't think they're going to gain the trust of any consumer of their product if they don't have some sort of ethics policy in place.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that there are companies who are definitely doing this. It sounds like your husband's company is definitely on the right track. And one company that I'm working with for a competition we're running for Neosensory, they have open ethical use of AI on their website that anyone can use. And it's really clear about what should be done. I think that AI ethics is always going to have to be, and ethics in general must be super cross-discipline, because you need to speak to the people that aren't using it that will be affected by it, people who can't use it but will be affected by it, and the people building it and the people designing it and the people who are going to make money off it. All of these different people need to be involved, because they, of course, have different views on what the important aspects of this are. And so protecting people and using it in the right way is going to have great benefit to all, but we just do need to talk about it to make sure that any problems are addressed, and talk about it with everyone. Even
where, the path that we went that might have sounded dark, we need to acknowledge that these things could happen, and then figure out solutions to try and stop that from happening. And I love your Women in Voice group, because I think that what a great start that is to having all sorts of, experiences and inclusivity and just all sorts of different thoughts and brainstorming going on, and how to have such a thing like a policy for ethics and inclusivity and voice. I love it.
Yeah, me too.
And another amazing podcast with you, Jennie. We just go down all these really cool paths. So I'm looking forward to our next one. And I'd like to give a great big shout out to our sponsor, IPDTL. You too can connect and network like a boss. Find out more at IPDTL.com. You guys have an amazing week, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you next time.
Bye.
Join us next week for another edition of VO Boss with your host, Ann Ganguza. And take your business to the next level. Sign up for our mailing list at voboss.com and receive exclusive content, industry revolutionizing tips and strategies, and new ways to rock your business like a boss. Redistribution with permission, coast-to-coast connectivity via IPDTL.